Okay, let's talk about one of the most dramatic roller coaster relationships in modern history. I'm talking about Britain and Germany. Over just 80 years, these two powers went from friends to mortal enemies and then back to allies. It's an incredible story, and it completely forged the Europe we know today.
So that's the big question, right? How on earth can two countries go from being friends to bit of enemies twice and then back to being allies, all within a single lifetime? As we're going to see, it's a wild ride, driven by ambition, fear, and eventually a common enemy. It really shows you just how thin that line between friend and foe can be. All right, so let's set the stage. We're kicking things off in a period that might actually surprise you, from 1870 to 1890. This is our first act, a time of, well, cautious friendship. A new powerhouse is about to pop up in the middle of Europe, and you might think that would cause immediate problems. But no, they started out as surprisingly productive friends.
So boom, 1871. A unified Germany just appears on the map of Europe. Now, if you're Britain, an island nation that's obsessed with keeping a balance of power on the continent, you'd think this would be cause for panic. But not really. Their initial reaction was actually pretty positive. They saw this new, strong Germany as a really useful counterweight to their old rivals, France and Russia. Great, they thought. Someone to keep them in check. But this relationship was complicated. It was a real two-sided coin. On the one side, you had some amazing cooperation. I mean, British liberals were looking over at Germany's new welfare programs, for health and old age, and were totally inspired. British engineers were even helping to build up German industry. But on the other side of that coin, there was this deep-seated, nagging suspicion. Britain was wary of Germany's Prussian militarism, this kind of authoritarian vibe they had. So while they were trading ideas and people, those ideological cracks, they were definitely already there.
And that brings us to Act 2, 1890 to 1914. This is where those little cracks we just talked about, they just shatter. The friendship sours, and it turns into an all-out rivalry that, honestly, is going to set the world on a path to war.
So what was the trigger? Well, it happens in 1890. The steady hand on the tiller, Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, the guy who always prioritized stability, he gets dismissed. And with him gone, it's like a whole new Germany is unleashed. A much more aggressive, much more ambitious Germany. The rules of the game had just completely changed. This new, assertive policy even had a name, Weltpolitik. It literally means world politics, and it was a huge declaration of intent. Germany was basically saying, we're done just being a big deal in Europe. We want to be a global power. They wanted a huge empire, a massive military, the whole shebang. And if you're the British Empire, at the height of its power, that sounds like someone's coming for your crown. And Germany's leader at the time, Kaiser Wilhelm II, he summed it up perfectly with this one famous line: "We demand our own place in the sun." You can just hear the ambition in that, right? It's confident, it's a little arrogant, and for Britain, it was completely unmistakable. This was a challenge. And that challenge became very, very real on the high seas. You gotta remember, Britain's power was built on its Royal Navy. It was their global insurance policy, the undisputed king of the oceans. So when Germany starts this massive shipbuilding program, trying to build a navy that can go toe-to-toe with them, well, that's a direct threat. This naval arms race becomes the #1 symbol of just how bad things were getting between them. But it wasn't just about ships. It was everything. Their economies were now in fierce competition. They were butting heads over colonies in Africa and elsewhere. You had these diplomatic blow-ups, like the crises in Morocco, that kept pushing them further apart. And all the while, the newspapers back home are fanning the flames, with sensational stories about spies and imminent invasions. So what's the result of all this? Europe basically splits down the middle into two heavily armed camps. You've got the Triple Entente on one side and the Triple Alliance on the other. It was a powder keg just waiting for a spark. So now we get to the darkest part of the story, from 1914 to 1945. That rivalry we've been talking about, it doesn't just simmer anymore, it explodes. This is the part of the story with two devastating world wars, a 30-year period of conflict, where Britain and Germany become the absolute bitterest of enemies.
And you can really draw a direct line through these 30 years of devastation. World War I ends, but the Treaty of Versailles that follows is so harsh that it leaves a deep, burning resentment in Germany. And it's that resentment that helps create the perfect conditions for the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. Britain tries a policy of appeasement, hoping to avoid another war, but it fails spectacularly. And in 1939, Germany invades Poland, and the world is plunged into World War II, which only ends with the total, unconditional surrender of Germany in 1945.
And the level of hostility in this second war, it's almost unimaginable. We're talking about the Blitz, where German bombs rain down on British cities night after night. And of course, the absolute horror of the Holocaust across Europe. There's no other way to put it. The relationship between these two nations had hit absolute rock bottom. It just couldn't get any worse. And that brings us to the final act, from 1945 to 1950. And honestly, this might be the most astonishing part of the whole story. Because from the smoking ruins of total war, these two bitter enemies are about to begin an incredibly rapid, totally unlikely journey to becoming allies. And it happens in just 5 years.
Okay, so the war ends. Germany is just shattered. It's a divided country, literally carved up into zones. And Britain finds itself in a strange new role. They're not just victors, they're an occupying power, responsible for managing one of these zones. Now, at first, the official policy was no fraternization. Keep your distance. But that changed really, really fast. The reality was they had to focus on the massive job of rebuilding the country and trying to create a new, stable, democratic Germany from the ashes.
So how in the world did this reconciliation happen so quickly? Well, it was a step-by-step process. First came the occupation and the focus on demilitarization and reconstruction. But the real game changer, the thing that accelerated everything, was a new, massive threat looming on the horizon: the Soviet Union. All of a sudden, having a strong, stable, democratic West Germany wasn't just a nice idea. For Britain and the entire West, it became an absolutely vital strategic necessity.
And it all comes to a head in one single pivotal year, 1949. The Federal Republic of Germany, what we know as West Germany, is officially born. And in that same year, this brand new German nation joins Britain as a founding member of NATO. Now just stop and think about that for a second. In 1945, they were locked in a fight to the death. Just 4 years later, they are official military allies, bound together to face a common threat. The transformation is just breathtaking. It's complete.
So there you have it. An incredible 80-year saga that took Britain and Germany from cautious friends to blood-soaked enemies and back to stalwart allies. It's a journey that literally created the Europe we live in. And it leaves us with a really important question for today. What does a story like this teach us about that thin and sometimes fragile line between who we call a rival and who we call an ally in the world right now?